وآل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين. صلى الله عليك يا أبا عبد الله، صلى الله عليك يا ابن رسول الله، روحي وأرواح العالمين لك الفداء، يا غريب يا مظلوم يا شهيد بأرض كربلاء. ثم السلام عليكم يا أهل الأزهر الحسين المظلوم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. أما بعد، قد قال الله تعالى في كتاب الحكيم وهو أصدق الصادقين: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، فأقم وجهك للدين حنيفا فطرة الله التي فطر الناس عليها لا تبديل لخلق الله ذلك الدين القيم ولكن أكثر الناس لا يعلمون. صلوات الله. The verse of the Quran from Surah Al-Rum invites us to ponder more carefully in the meaning of something that God doesn't change. This is a source of controversy among Muslims themselves. If our natures don't change, then what exactly is the process of our transformation? Because after all, we are searching for a way to change and to transform ourselves. How can we do it if our natures are fixed? Imam Fakhruddin Razi, for example, in Tafsir al-Kabir, makes it quite clear. La tabdila li khalqillah, there is no change to be expected in the way God has created us, means actually that He has created us on Tawheed. That means we will all end up believing in one God. Because in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there is only one religion. And that religion is the religion of submission to His will, al-Islam, so to speak. Now, Allama Tabatabai has written a long response to Imam Fakhruddin Razi. I mean to say, to his tafsir. And his basic argument is that in that case, all human beings would have been conditioned to believe in one God, and all other religions who have different ways of conceiving God would have been impossible. There are Hindus who believe in several divinities. There are Christians who believe differently. There are Buddhists who believe not only that there is no God, but there is a path that leads to something that is very satisfying to human beings, the nirvana. In other words, what Allama Tabatabai has underscored is very important for you and me to understand. And that is, there is plurality of religions in the world. But you and I we are engaged in hearing about important matters connected with our religion. And I'm presenting these views to you as a student of Islam. I'm not an authority. If you think I'm an authority, then it's a mistaken thing. At the same time, I'm not that careless person who would play with your faith and my own faith. Listening and a listener are two important functions of religion. Al-istima', Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Isra praises those يَسْتَمِعُونَ الْقَوْلِ وَيَتَّبِعُونَ, people who are listening carefully and follow what they listen. Hearing revolutionizes the way I understand things. If I did not hear things the way I ought to hear, then I might not benefit from hearing at all. Because as a listener, I am not only listening, but I'm also paying a witness. I'm a witness to an event. That event is what I mention sometimes in the lecture, and you hear it and you pay witness to it, that this is what he says. It requires some kind of scrutiny on your part. If you are going to function as a witness to what has been said, then you will have to be very careful as a witness, because then you will be asked to come in the court and settle a dispute about what was said and what was heard. Are you with me? This is how the riwayat are mentioned, by the way. When somebody says, I heard Imam Muhammad Baqir alayhi salam say this and that, then that person is a witness to what Imam Muhammad Baqir is saying. And he carries the burden of reporting exactly what has been said. It's a lot of burden on the listeners, by the way. Because you might be asked to repeat what the speaker said. And you have to repeat it in such a way that the truth comes out of it. You can't repeat hearsay. I think that's what he said. That's not acceptable as a witness. Now I'm aware, and I must apologize if I hurt your feelings when I mentioned Salat last night. I'm truly very sorry if I hurt your feelings. Because I did say that God will know. I've heard my lecture again 2 times, twice. So that I'm an objective listener to my own lecture. I am a witness to my own speech. And I said it in a context and not out of context. That God will not punish if you did not pray 5 times a day. But He will punish if you did not use your mind. If you did not use your eyes very well. This is the directory index of the entire Quran. Last night, I sat until 2 a.m. studying every possible verse that speaks about Salat. There is not a single verse in the Quran in which Allah says, I will punish you if you don't pray 5 times a day. In fact, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يَدُقُّ الْيَتِيمِ وَلَا يَحُضُّ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ يُرَاءُونَ وَيَمْنَعُونَ الْمَاعُونَ. There's a criticism in the Quran. Have you seen those people who reject the Day of Judgment? They are the ones who don't feed the poor. They are the ones who don't take care of those who are needy. And by implication, they are the ones who are neglectful about their prayers. They are the ones who show others that they are praying. They pray for others to see them. And they are the ones who do not help those who need to be helped. Only one criticism of Musallin in the entire Quran, no mention of adhab on those who will not pray. Now, I'm very sad and truly disappointed from my own sons and daughters, by the way. Do you think I would insult the institution of Salat? Do you really believe this? I sit in this place, this is the member of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You think, are they so careless? So neglectful? To the extent whereby you might say, oh, I'm glad my children were not here. If they had heard this, they would have stopped praying. Isn't that a very radical conclusion from what I say? I heard, and my tone is, by the way, not the usual tone, it's very soft. I was worried, maybe I said it very angry, because I do get angry. I must say sometimes I shout, I'm not always calm and cool. But what really made me very sad was the comments I received. A sister came and asked me, you mean to say God will not punish us if we don't pray 5 times a day? I said, yes. It's entirely between you and God. Inna salati wa nusuki wa mahyaya wa mamati lillahi rabbil alamin. I'm not praying to get anybody's approval anywhere. But I'm sure, if I don't think, the Quran clearly says you'll be punished. There is not a single verse that says, I have created human beings so that I will put them in the fire, in the hellfire, because they did not pray 5 times a day. There's not a single verse. I challenge you. There are 84 verses that speak about Salat in the Quran. Totally 84 verses. And they all are saying, Aqimus Salat wa atu zakat. Even if we don't give the zakat, and you and I don't, do we? Do we? We don't give zakat. We pray 5 times a day, but we don't give the zakat. Is the commandment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala carried on? How are we fulfilling that commandment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How can you ever believe that me sitting here would try to undermine the pillar of our faith, Salat? But I'm very critical of including myself if we don't pray properly, if we don't understand the Salat properly. The Salat is, Inna salata tanha anil fahsha'i wal munkar, wa la dhikrullahi akbar. Salat stops you from shameful deeds. If you see yourself praying 5 times a day and you commit the acts of shameful things, then you are not praying. I must be very, very honest about it. I'm not worried if you stop praying. That's not my worry. My worry is that I will not tell you untruth from this place. No. I will not play with my religion the way people play with their religion from this seat when they make money out of it. I will not do that. That's not me. That's not me. I'm really sad to realize that you had to complain that I'm undermining the institution of Salat. Astaghfirullah. I don't have to tell you where I pray. I don't have to remind you what I've said about Salat, that even if you're drowning, if it is the time of Asr that is going to be completed, you haven't prayed, you better pray. You better pray. But that means something very different than what I said. I said clearly when I read the ayat of the Quran, and I read again tonight so that you know very well where I'm coming from. And I'm very clear. وَلَقَدْ زَرَعْنَا لِجَهَنَّمَ كَثِيرًا مِنَ الْجِنِّ وَالْإِنسِ لَهُمْ قُلُوبٌ لَا يَفْقَهُونَ بِهَا. If Allah wanted us to be punished for not performing the Salat, He would have mentioned that وَلَقَدْ زَرَعْنَا كَثِيرًا مِنَ الْجِنِّ وَالْإِنسِ هُمْ لَا يُصَلُّونَ. Oh, He would have said it. I'm right when I say that in priorities, to think about your religion and to believe with ma'rifah is far more important than performing the rituals you don't benefit from. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. That doesn't mean that I'm preaching to stop you from praying. That's between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or you and I are caught up in the battle that we must start tonight. The battle of bias. We've been mentioning that modernity requires understanding of its values and the foundation. You cannot understand modernity if you don't understand the values that inform modernity. My search is for action, by the way. I'm very much concerned about giving a form of a plan for action. فَأَقِمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلدِّينِ حَنِيفًا is a challenge to you and to me. How do we recognize the religion of God from the mess we have created about it in our own behavior? Are you with me? We have created a mess of our religion. How do you and I inform ourselves about our religion in such a way that we can say with confidence, Ya Allah, I heard your command, I'm following it. You told me, فَأَقِمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلدِّينِ حَنِيفًا, I'm willing to go for that Deen al-Hanif. I want to find that religion of balances, that religion that is moderate, that religion that will take me to my goal, because you have already created for me a path. The nature with which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created me requires a process. If there is no process, you and I cannot move any forward. Well, you and I function with a bias. The bias is something very unconscious. We are inclined to believe certain things, we are inclined not to believe certain things. The Western model of modernity has its own bias. The Islamic response has its own bias. What I'm suggesting is that we are all subject to bias, including myself. I'm not excluded. We all have our own bias. This bias, by the way, in Arabic is tahayyuz. Tahayyuz. Hayyaza is to be inclined to follow something that your heart is in it. Therefore you get into bias position. You have a bias for, and sometimes you have a bias against something. Something that agrees with you, you have bias for it, towards it. Something you disagree with, you say, I am biased against it. In other words, there is something that serves to establish the foundation of our relationships. Without relationships, we are helpless. Remember what I say. The ritual and autobiography takes place in the society. I perform the rituals. I do the salat, I do fasting, I do everything. I give the zakat on time. All these things is supposed to decrease my anxiety. I'm anxious. I'm asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that please remove that anxiety from me and give me peace through the performance of the ritual. Therefore I said, it needs reflexive autobiography. I need to think about myself self-critically. If I don't criticize myself, there is no way that I can go through the process of change that is in front of me. The moment I say La ilaha illallah, it poses me with a challenge, and I need to move forward. The reason is very much in this observation of Ibn al-Arabi. We need to undergo the changes. You will not be able to derive the pleasure of performing the rituals until you go through the transformation yourself. One of the reasons why our children don't listen to us when we tell them to pray, they don't see any qualitative difference in us as those who worship. Are you with me? You're supposed to lead them in their prayers. You're supposed to show those qualities in you that the prayer has generated. Many times we fall short. So when our children look at us and they say, this is the source of my identity, they get confused. They say, this is not a good source for me. I'm confused by looking at my mom. I'm confused by looking at my father. Because they are not generating confidence in my own identity. What I need in my autobiography is to feel comfortable with my own identity. And I'm struggling with it. But I'm also controlled by my biases. The question arises, if human beings are born free to make decisions, and I'll give you a very important issue here, that when we met Ayatollah Mohsin al-Hakim for the first time, in the first Hajj that we performed, we were 13 people in the group, and we went to see Ayatollah Mohsin al-Hakim. So I was the interpreter for my group, and he asked this question, is this your first Hajj? We all said yes, including myself. This was the first time I was going to Hajj. Then Ayatollah Mohsin Hakim said, Allah has forgiven you all your sins because you performed the Hajj for the first time. So we are all happy to hear that Allah has forgiven, our slates are clean. We can go back with a lot of peace. He said, but look at this. Allah forgives only His hukuk to you. That is haqqullah. To pray is the right of God. To fast is the right of God. To perform the Hajj is the right of God. If you did not perform for the whole life, then Allah reserved the right to forgive you. But then he said, if the right of a fellow Muslim or a fellow human is not fulfilled by you, then you are responsible for it, and God does not forgive you that. I have bothered you. I said something wrong about you. I criticized you on your back. I have violated your rights as a human person. I have violated your dignity. Your dignity required me to come and talk to you in front of you and said, my sister, I think I disagree with what you do. If I talk behind you, then I have sinned. I have sinned against God, I have sinned against you. Now, if I have sinned against God, God does not forgive me until I have been forgiven by you. Are you with me? You have to forgive me because I have wronged you. I have taken your rights of being saved from my tongue. My tongue is sharp. When I criticize wrongly. Then I have to pay for it. This is what is known as hukukun nas. Our bias sometimes forces us to ignore hukukun nas. So we go and perform the rituals and we think that we have done enough. We don't have to attend to the human needs. This is why we are not paying zakat. I'm assuring you that out of this, I don't know how many people are here tonight, at least 80% are not giving zakat. I don't know about others, but I can say 80% of us are not giving zakat. We do give khums, by the way. I must also point out that we do give khums, but we don't give zakat. On the other hand, I think the Quran establishes aqimus salat wa atus zakat. Salat and zakat have been kept together. Salat is never mentioned alone. In other words, there is an objective faith that comes in your helping others through the zakat. The subjective part is when you worship Allah and nobody is saying you. In fact, most of us would pray in the privacy of our homes. Nobody sees us. I don't think we are in the business of showing others that we pray. What I'm suggesting here is that our bias is built upon a limited knowledge of our rituals. And it tells us something about it. And therefore we get very much unsettled. The boat is rocked. very strong. Say, oh my God, does it mean rituals should not be performed? What the question ought to be is this: I am a mysterious human being. God has created me in all mysteries. And the fact is that my plan has been handed down to me by God. I'm not saying the predetermination. But Allah knows that Abdulaziz one day will become, this or that, or he will lose that opportunity, and, because if that were not possible, Imam Husayn in his Dua Arafat would not have said it, وَخِلِّ فِي قَضَائِكَ وَبَارِكْ لِي فِي قَدَرِكَ. This is Imam Husayn saying, وَخِلِّ فِي قَضَائِكَ. The decision you have made about me, Ya Allah, bless me in those decisions. And barik li fi qadarik. You have fixed certain things for me. I didn't choose to come in this world. I wouldn't have chosen to come in this world probably. Well, you chose for me. You have planned for me. And therefore, make that qadar, make that, measurement and those destinies for me blessed ones. So that I don't get caught up in my own web. In other words, there is a sense in which the plans are made. My question arises, your and mine question is that, can we upset divine plans? La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Can I do something that would totally upset the qadr that has been written for me? What do you think? If you believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is qadirun ala kulli shay, He has the power over everything. He created us, therefore He controls us. But in the past lectures, I already said that no, in areas in which you and I will be questioned, we have been set free. Areas for which we have not been questioned, will not be questioned, are those areas for which we had no choice. Human beings have a lot of freedom to do what they want to do. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has also allowed us to upset divine plans. Therefore the wrongs happen. The wrongs happen in the history because we have been given the right to upset those. Sometimes you want to do justice, you are going to vote with full consciousness of your sense of justice. Two friends meet you on the road and they say, who are you going to vote for? No way. You can't vote for him. You need to vote for him. Your mind is changed. In other words, your determination, God was guiding you, was telling you, go. It is your right to vote, to cast your vote. You must do it. It's your responsibility as a citizen of this particular part of the world. You must do it. And if I didn't do it, if I was going to do, and my own assessment was that the particular candidate, both are evil. One is less evil than this one is. You are making a selection in the process of history. And you are sometimes upsetting what God wants things to happen. Because if you remember, you read in the Dua Iftatah, in the month of Ramadan, you say, in the Dua Iftatah, you say, يُهْلِكَ مُلُوكًا وَيَسْتَخْلِفُ آخَرِينَ. You are the ones who bring people to authority, and you remove others from authority. In other words, it's your work to bring people in power. Really? Mitt Romney would disagree. He thought he would come. Believe me, up to the last moment, he thought he would come. He thought he would upset that plan. That the Democrats would have lost, so to speak. The idea was, every ad on the television was trying to upset the balance between justice and the requirements of the reality. Human beings are working within the reality of the life. You and I are working, constantly assessing the reality of our lives. And that's how we make decisions. If we don't know how to assess our life situation, then we won't be able to make right decisions. This is where unconscious bias is extremely important. I don't mean to say bias is wrong. What I want to emphasize is that bias forces us to look for an example which can generate confidence in us. I don't have confidence in this candidate or that candidate, but I know a political system that is not based on justice, that is based on racial discrimination, religious discrimination, is not going to work for me. I'm a member of a minority. It's not in my interest to vote for a candidate who is racist, who is divisive in the citizenry. In other words, I need to assert my authority. And my authority comes from my search of an example. My example is moving all the time because it is dependent upon my knowledge. This is where I come. There is a dichotomy, there is a difference between knowing something objectively and knowing something subjectively in your mind. There are many things you and I see, and we learn from them, and we learn very clearly about them, and we accept them. But there are certain things that are informed with our subjective understanding. That means our reality, our experience with the real life is actually biased by our objective knowledge and subjective understanding. Many times you and I lose touch with the reality. Why does that happen to us? Because we are not paying attention to the real situation the way it ought to be paid. We are the product of our tradition. Whether we like it or not, we are traditional. We are also the product of our value system. Our value systems are the ones that produce in us responsiveness. The need to do certain things in a certain way is very much informed by what we know about our value system. My value system is to have a good family. I will not sacrifice my family for anything. My value system is to have a good neighborhood, because that's what matters in life. Who do you relate with? Therefore, I will do all the search so that I can find the neighborhood where I'm comfortable. These are the value system, but we are also dealing with social reality. Your social reality informs you about what action should I take. You and I are worried about our young children getting into the society, not being able to control themselves. This is our worry, by the way. Muslim parents everywhere in the world are worried, including Tehran, by the way. Tehran schools are no more safe. They are no different than New York schools. They are no different than Toronto schools. Maybe in Toronto we might fare much better, because at least we have the freedom of speech where we can criticize the school system, saying that, no, I don't agree with this. I still remember these mothers in Detroit, because the children were, the boys were put in the bathroom and they were supposed to wash themselves naked in front of one another. These Arab women, they said, no, we don't do that. And the school had to listen to them. They provided curtains. Says, okay, the boys will, they'll separate from one another. In other words, we have at least power to influence. Imagine the countries where we don't have a power, where there's no freedom of speech, because any criticism on your part will be seen as a challenge to the highest authority of the country. Then what do? These are the social realities with which we act every day, day in, day out. Biases are important also in the area where you and I are dealing with the human life situation. They're going to make a decision in the hospital about reviving your sick person. You don't want to submit to the hospital's decision to discontinue, to switch off the respirator, let's say. All the doctors are saying that this is futile treatment. This life-saving treatment doesn't work, and it's not going to work. You are required to make a decision to agree with them or disagree with them, and you are confused. What should you do? Under the circumstances, you make a decision that I will not allow you to discontinue the respirator because my religion, my value system does not agree with your decision. It is totally against it. Life belongs to God. God gives life and takes away life whenever He wants to take it. In other words, we don't interfere in God's work. The doctors, the team of doctors are trying to convince you. Now, I remember getting telephone sometimes from Sacramento hospital system, sometimes from Los Angeles, sometimes from Pittsburgh, that we have this case. How do we determine? These people are Muslims in faith, and therefore they are resisting what we are suggesting to them. This is the whole idea of autonomy. Do I have a right to make a decision myself, or should I consult the other people in my family to make that decision? You know that in our culture, your and my culture, we make those decisions collectively. We don't let one person make the decision. We also don't. We should never, by the way, impose our collective decision when the person who actually should be deciding is not consulted. That's very important, by the way. This is what we call informed consent. That means they have an information about why this question is being asked. But you and I are caught up in what we call a paradigm that we need to work with. And the paradigm should be such which is somehow placating my worries about the culture in which I am living. You and I are sometimes radically critical about the culture in which we are living. It is the Western, modern, secular culture. And you and I don't agree with it. Some of the value systems that are being taught under those decisions are not known to us. But if you read Peter Singer, for example, Peter Singer thinks that brain death is brain death. Oh, we can harvest the organs anytime we need them. Now, Peter Singer's position is extreme. But you should also read Ibrahim Musa. You should also read Shirin Hamdi. These are the new, bioethicists who are talking about Islamic views. In other words, what we are looking for is a replacement paradigm. We have one example that is not working, that is not satisfactory for us. Therefore, we need another example. We need our own example. In other words, there are humanitarian values in the Western culture. I don't think Western culture is, neglectful of the human values. I don't think so. Therefore, our criticism should be very careful of the Western system. What we are searching for is more deeper understanding of human nature. The way human beings do progress in their own perfection. Where would they reach the perfection? This is where Allama Tabatabai is worried. That if you follow Fakhruddin Razi's position in his tafsir about this verse, La tabdila li khalqillah, there is no possibility of change of God's laws, then you might conclude very wrongly that every moment of your and my life has been fixed by God. We are simply carrying out what God has already fixed. Then where is our own responsibility? This is where we are stuck. Ahlul Bayt said, you are responsible for what you do. And you will be accounting for what you do. In other words, we are looking for a model. We are looking for a paradigm. There is a shift of paradigm at the moment. The paradigm is not the same. You and I very readily agreed with what others were saying. You and I readily agreed when our doctors, when our engineers, when our home planners, they told us this is what you need. But look at this, by the way. Take an example. And this is worth looking into itself. You and I use different kinds of chairs at home. Now this is very simple, everyday example. But you and I never thought. We come from a culture where we used to sit on the floor. Our knees were actually designed in such a way by the nature it helped us. We could sit on the floor for hours without getting tired. There were no chairs in our mosques when we went. In other words, the chairs were not needed. We had, mats. Or, at the most, we had some carpets on them. But otherwise, our habits were to sit on the ground. Look at the Arab culture in 7th century, 8th century, even now, pre-modern days, where you don't have any system of sitting on a chair. You have a system of sitting on the floor. That's how the camps were set. There were pillows that you could rely on, but otherwise there were no chairs. Chairs were introduced with modernity, and what was done was that modernity said, this is the way we live, this is our paradigm, it has worked for us, it will work for you. And we accepted it. Well, you and I know that some paradigms don't work very well because we are different culturally. Imagine I cited a very small example of a chair, but it could be a major example of problem solution. When you and I sit with a problem, there's a family problem. Then the Quran is directing us that something you need to do with shura, with some kind of consultation. You must sit together and solve the problem in the family. If one person is too strong and demanding that this is the way and this is the only way to solve the problem, you go away from that solution. Otherwise, all the parties must have, this is known as Islah in the Quran. Islah is to hear both sides of the stories. If you don't know both sides of the stories, then you might come to a wrong conclusion about the dispute that is occurring at this time. And this happens in many, many cases in the modern situation when you and I are working, sometimes as social workers, sometimes, as arbiters, you go into this situation and you try to solve them. But if you don't understand the culture in which these decisions are made in a certain way, then you might have a difficulty of convincing your audience. What I'm talking about then is, bias is inevitable. On this side of the conflict is my son. On this side of the conflict is my neighbor's son. Surely my bias is going to be towards my son. I will look at my son less critically than I would look at the son of the neighbors, let's say. Here we have to develop what we call a critique of criticism. We need to develop something that gives us chance to retrieve something that is very important in our culture, in our society. When I do research in the university, I'm biased because I'm Muslim. I have a soft corner for Islam. And some of the professors in Harvard have commented on my work saying that Abdulaziz is a fundamentalist. That means I am not saying something against Islam. That's what it means, by the way. I treat Islam very respectfully because that's what my training has been. I'm the product of the seminary as much as the university. I'm biased. I ask you, is my bias valid or invalid? Your answer will be, it is valid because after all, you can't separate your own brain from your own context. You can't separate your own being from the environment in which you are growing up. Our minds are made up through the environment in which we are working, in which we are existing, and therefore it's very difficult to fight it. The struggle then is, how does the bias contradict my commitment to the truth? Are you with me? How is my bias working against me? When it comes to the truth, then I don't support it, or I support it maybe blindly. Whatever I do, it is my bias that's going to determine my fate. A very important issue then is method. Is method neutral? Is the way I solve problems neutral? Is the way you solve problems neutral? It's never neutral. When you object to something, are you neutral about it? Not necessarily. You might have already preconditioned your mind with certain things, and therefore, when you are arguing about it, your bias stands out. You don't trust your child. You've seen certain things, and it makes you wonder, where does he go? Where does he go from school? I don't have this information about 2 hours between the school and before the return of my child at home. Whatever you try to ask your child, the answer is not satisfactory because you are functioning under the bias of what you have seen, unaccountability of the 2 hours. Therefore, you don't trust the child. In a way, you might be doing injustice, by the way, because you don't know. You might be going to the library. You might be going with the friends to play a game, of soccer or something. You don't know about it. What requires you to come out of the bias is research. For that, you need a method. Nowadays, by the way, husbands and wives have spies over one another. Yeah, even in Iran. I heard this from Iranian women that I have a spy, jasus daram. I have this spy, who goes and finds out where my husband is. Oh, I'm sure the husband does the same thing for the wife too. I don't know where my woman is. And therefore, in other words, you do spying, but that's not the right way to do it. وَلَا تَجَسَّسُوا. The Quran says very clearly, don't spy on one another. Don't do that. That's the wrong, method. The method is to find a way of gaining access to the truth. If you can't get access to the truth, then you better not say anything until the proof is provided. When the proof is provided, then you proceed. What we need then in the method is 3 things. Please pay attention to it. We need cultural understanding. We also need instruments to interpret the culture. If the culture is discrete, in some cultures, you don't say certain things in public. You don't discuss certain things in public. You always keep them private. In order to understand the culture, you need cognition. You need a way of understanding the culture. You need what we call cross-cultural communication. You need to understand a Muslim parent. How different is a Muslim parent from other Christian parent or other non-religious parent? If you don't understand that culture, there's no way for you to establish a paradigm. So, culture, cognition, and a paradigm. An example to which you can fall back again and again. In other words, the method is action. Yesterday, Onali was asking me, how do we come to the application of what you are saying? I laid down my groundwork for you. By the way, this is a book of 170 pages. So I tried to digest as much as I could so that I could make it simple enough for you to understand. I came to this conclusion that one of the basic problems of action plan in our community is lack of understanding where to look in the tradition and where to retrieve it. Because what has worked in the community for all these years, we think it can work for the other 50 years or 100 years. What you and I are recognizing very clearly is the new culture of questioning. There's a culture of questioning in our young people. They question each and everything. They question even on their own identity. In other words, we are in the process of resolving the issues connected with the crisis of identity. There's a crisis of identity. How do we do it? How do we understand this? We are then retrieving the tradition, but before we retrieve anything, we need to be critical about it, and you and I are worried. The last 4 lectures, I heard the comments all the time, we are worried. Any new interpretation unsettles our comfort zone, so to speak. We are not used to be disturbed. We can be disturbed economically and socially and culturally, but not religiously. Have you noticed that? We want to continue status quo in religion. What Imam Husayn is trying to do is that status quo will lead you to disaster. Then Banu Umayyah will control you. Banu Abbas will control you. Those who are wrongdoers will have influence over you. And you will not be able to come out of those influences. As much as you will try to fight those elements, you will be defeated. Critical assessment then became one of the cornerstones of my first two lectures. I made it very clear that without engaging your own tradition, you will not be able to deserve a kind of a new thinking that you are trying to find. Because critical assessment must lead to interpretation. You must be willing to interpret something that is not in the books. You're reading the Quran, like I read the Quran, I saw that very clearly that, oh my God, there is criticism of those who don't think. There is criticism of those who don't see. But there is no criticism of those who don't pray 5 times a day. What is then important in the eyes of the Quran? There's a new interpretation. There's a new ijtihad, which rocks our comfort zone, because we are not used to be shaken by that. We are very comfortable in the level that we say, okay, this is the way I believe, and I don't want to be told anything different. Remember, that's what Imam Ali did in Nahj al-Balagha. سيأتي عليكم زمان لا يبقى من القرآن إلا رسمه. There will come a time in your own midst. This is critical assessment of Imam Ali. There will come a time when nothing of the Quran but its ceremonies will remain. That's what we do. Our daughters might not have read the Quran at all, but when they leave the home, there's a Quran on their head. And we think, yeah, the Quran will bless. Did the Quran come for that? In Iran, by the way, when you travel, they bring the Quran in the tray, and there's water in it, and there's Zira Quran lecture. Go under the Quran. I said, oh, did the Prophet do it? I don't know. This is what we call reassessment of the retrieved tradition. Remember this. Where Imam Jafar Sadiq Sufra. Well, now we have, different ceremonies connected with. By the way, they are extremely cultural. I know God has the power to listen. God listens. I'm telling you, my sisters and my brothers, test God. He has made it very clear. Ud'uni mustajib lakum. You ask me, I'll give you. We don't ask the alam to give us something. That's not right. We don't ask Imam Jafar Sadiq to do something for us. We ask Allah to listen to the wasila, to the ability of Imam Jafar Sadiq to say, this man is my follower. Ya Allah, listen to me if it is good for him to do it. See how it works? There are traditions. If you don't sit in the assessment of the tradition, you will be bound by them. When you are bound by them, your bias sets in. And your bias doesn't help you out. فَأَقِمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلدِّينِ حَنِيفًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that you will have to find the masses and put them out of your religion so that you can become close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Qurba of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. God will not listen to us. God will not listen to us if there are wells on our hearts. You open your heart and Allah listens to you. So it is calling for action. For ages I have believed that this is what it is, and now I'm being told, no, that's not what it is. This is known as the truth and the search for the truth. And search for the truth, if you remember my lectures in 2010, I think, when I came here, and we spoke about truth. How to retrieve truth. This time, I want to come to this conclusion very quickly that Without the critical retrieval, you and I will always be thirsty. Organization of Islamic learning is an organization committed to not become a mushtahid. I don't think that's the purpose. But certainly it wants us to say that you better start acting. You've preached long enough. You've followed the tradition long enough. Now you need to practice what you have learned. And I think that's where the challenge lies. With all due respect to all the rituals that we perform, and I'm more into this ritual of Azadari, by the way. Azadari, I'm telling you, this is the miracle of Imam Husayn alayhi salam. Nobody would have come. Asked people to come, get them the best lecturer, oil organization, Zahid, Abdulaziz, if you get one of the best, big shots to come and talk to the community, they will not come. All members will not come. I assure you, only 50 people will show up. It happens. Because I've been invited in the past, not in Muharram, other days, and only 50, 60 people showed up. But look at the miracle of Imam Husayn alayhi salam. This is the love of Imam Husayn. These days are special, and only Imam Husayn can bring people together. I'm telling you, this is the truth. Imam Husayn has the ability to bring people together. And I'm sure one day Imam Husayn will unite the entire humanity. Because you and I are looking for humanism, Islamic humanism. Islamic humanism is not a humanism that says materialism and naturalism are important. Materialism is important. To have a good home is important. To have a good life is important. But it's not an end in itself. End is something connected with your heart. It's connected with your heart. And I think this is what I have been able to convey to you. Don't get me wrong. I have not come to rock your beliefs. I've come to confirm them because I'm also part of that belief. But I will not stand by while you carry a misunderstanding about your own tradition. I will not stand by. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can ask me, you had an opportunity, why didn't you speak up? Ya Allah, I was afraid they would not give me my honorarium. They will say, okay, we cut down a check from $1,000 to $500. Alhamdulillah, I'm such a free person. I don't have to worry about anything. No honorariums, nothing. Nobody can tempt me with anything. And yet, I'm simply a human being. I'm full of my bias. I'm very prejudiced in certain areas. And my area of sensibility is, wherever there is no ethics, I get shocked. Wherever there is no morality, I get shocked. And I'm with Allama Tabatabai when he says that something that will unite humanity is karamat al-insan, the human dignity. He says it. It's one of the, وَذَلِكَ لَيْسَ الدِّينُ إِلَّا سُنَّةِ الْحَيَاةِ ليس الدين إلا سنة الحياة والسبيل التي يجب على الإنسان أن يسلكها. Religion is a tradition. Allama Tabatabai says, is a tradition connected with human life. You are supposed to live a life. If you claim to be just and fair, then show that you are just and fair. If you claim to be compassionate, then show that you are compassionate. In other words, Quran is not satisfied with a religion that does not end up into action. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ أُولَٰئِكَ هُمْ خَيْرُ الْبَرِيَّةِ. Those who believe and act righteously, that means they do moral acts, they are the best people. Belief alone. They interview constantly some members of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. Egypt, by the way, there's a lot of worry in Canadian government how to deal with Egyptian government because it happens to be Islamic government. And there's such an ill feeling about it that they think that Islamic government will suffocate all democracy, all liberal values, and will create all kinds of unnecessary animosities in the world. So there was this article today in Globe and Mail. I read just part of it, and they're worried about this reporter went to Egypt to find out what are they going to do with this proposal. Hamas is engaged in very violent activities, and Muslim Brotherhood have been the supporters of Hamas, and so has Iran been the supporter of Hamas, and Hamas is not listening to any reason to anything. Okay, now Canadian government has stakes in it. If there is a lot of business, businesses are. It's a big market. It's not a small market. Therefore, they have to come to terms with the new Islamists, as they call them, brotherhood. Now, there was something positive in today's Globe and Mail, by the way. It was positive assessment that maybe the Arab Spring is producing better results. But what I'm saying here is that if we do not sit in our own assessment of our own spring and our own summer and our own fall and winter, when are we going to change and take off from the ground? This is where Imam Husayn alayhi salam is shaking us up. Iqbal's line, I was trying to remember, I asked my friends, do you remember the first Misra? It was about Andalib, about, the nightingale. And Iqbal is saying, Iqbal was very perceptive about the humanity, about the community's lack of response. He says, this Andalib, this bulbul is crying out, Naghma daraz. Ab is shaman mein. I don't remember. And be bargosaz, hum hai, ab is shaman mein. This world in which you and I are existing, Andalib comes, this bulbul comes and sings all these songs and tries to awaken us. So you and I listen to the songs and we forget about what we are supposed to do. Iqbal had that sense in which there was an urgency. I think that urgency was in the early part of the 1900s. It was in the early part. It was in the mid-1930s, 1920s, 1930s, when Muslim League was established. And, Iqbal was the president of the Muslim League in 1933 when he gave the presidential address. Now, when you look at the presidential address, I think what you realize is that there is some kind of realism in Iqbal. Well, you know how they reduced him? Iqbal complained in one of the ghazals, he said, "Mujhe ghazal sara kehte hain." They make me, I'm trying to teach them something through the poetry. Well, what do they say to me? Oh, you are a good lyric poet. Kya wo ishq ke gaane gaata hai. This is, you're talking about this. Ghazal is, love songs. In other words, we can really downplay the role of a reformer at our own expense.